Welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. I'm Brittany, I'm the Seeker.
And I'm Jonathan, and that makes me the skeptic. Today, we are interviewing someone that Brittany and I have not met before. The majority of our interviews so far have been people that are part of our life one way or another. And today, we have with us Jeff Lyman. He responded to a thread on Reddit that we made looking for people to interview for the show. Jeff is almost 40 with a wife and two kids, and he's been a hardcore skeptic since around the age of 14. Things have recently started to change for him, and we're going to explore why and what's going on. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Glad to have you. You mentioned in the answers to our little questionnaire that you had deconverted from Catholicism when you were about 14. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little more about that?
So yeah, raised Catholic, always taught to be guilty and have lots of shame for myself. That's mostly what I remember growing up.
Yep, I know that.
Went to CCD as a kid for several years, went to church every single week, was always bored. Um, it never really added up to me, but I would say I believed it just because that was the default setting for me. I was indoctrinated into it, I guess I'll say.
Mhm.
And yeah, at 14, I was in science class in high school, and I had a teacher that, looking back, was very clearly atheist, although he wasn't, open about it or trying to convert anyone. He just spoke what he thought. And so, yeah, looking back on it, he clearly did not believe in God, and he would sort of talk about it sometimes as he talked about science and natural explanations for things. I just sort of found, yeah, that makes more sense than what I was told growing up. Um, so it didn't take long for me to just start to really doubt the stuff I'd been taught, what was in the Bible. Science made a lot more sense. And for most of my life, I was, and I would say to some extent still, just extremely skeptical about pretty much everything, and atheist for many years.
Hey, fair enough. Definitely not far from some experiences that I had in my youth as well. Turns out that science can explain things and give you steps of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned you had what you called a spiritual experience around 10 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit
About
about that?
10 years ago. Yeah. So still an atheist at this time. And um, So I'll start it where my memory and my experience starts, because I don't have any memory of anything preceding what I guess we can call a vision. Um, Although, like I said, it was more than visual. I felt like I was actually there. But it started off by the bookshelf in what we called the cottage, which was a vacation home. My family, it was in the family, and we would go there every year, every summer, and we had a lot of great memories there. So I just sort of found myself there, but there was no confusion or anything. And I noticed my mom sitting on the couch in, the big common area. And so I just went to go talk to her and chat with her a bit. Now, she had passed away several years before this experience. She was an alcoholic. She drank herself to death over many years. It was pretty rough to witness. And towards the end of her life, she kind of had the mentality of a child,
Mhm.
at least when she wasn't more lucid. Sometimes she would get more lucid and be somewhere back to normal. So yeah, I went over to talk with her, and we just chit chatted with some small talk. The first thing I kind of noticed was she was pregnant, and I knew that she was pregnant with me. And in this moment, it didn't feel weird or anything. It just seemed normal. It was like, oh, that's me in there. She's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, neat. And she was completely lucid, normal, happy in ways that I actually never knew her, even as a child, even before, the alcohol had started to take its toll. So yeah, a lot of the communication between her and I in this experience was just given to me through a kind of connection that just existed, kind of like plugging in a USB into your laptop or something. Now all of a sudden your computer can interact with that, it can interact with the data, and it can start using it. When I was here in this space, there was a connection to her, and information was flowing, and we understood each other just naturally from that. And the words we were saying, it was all essentially just small talk. We already knew all of the information we had to present. And the reason for this connection, because it was communicated to me, was to inform me of an afterlife. I knew this intuitively.
Mm.
And so I asked her, okay, so there's an afterlife then. And again, for all intensive purposes, this was just small talk. And she responded, well, yeah. And there was just kind of like a moment of silence and understanding. And then she said, well, I've got to go. I've got stuff to do. And I didn't feel any regret or sadness that it was ending and it was over. I just merely felt that it was nice to catch up. And then, for lack of a better word, I woke up. Um, Now, I was sleeping. It was at this moment I find myself in my room, where I normally wake up, in the position I'm in when I normally wake up. So I must have been sleeping prior to this experience, but it didn't feel like waking up. It felt like I had been up the whole time, and I was just sort of transported to my room. And there were a couple of interesting things about waking up. One is that I was worried I had missed my alarm. But when I went to look at my alarm, it turned out that it was exactly the time I had set it for, except my alarm was not going off. And it had never
Mm.
failed me before or since. And so then I went to start getting ready for my day, went into the bathroom, noticed I had a spontaneous nosebleed. So I cleaned that up. And
Ooh,
again, I've never had a spontaneous nosebleed before or since in my life.
wow.
So that's pretty much the story. Yeah.
That, that's very interesting. Um, how did you feel afterwards?
Immediately afterwards, I remember definitely considering what the heck just happened here, right? This isn't something I believe in. This isn't something that was buried in my subconscious. And this definitely was not a dream. Um, I, so, I'm just starting to think, well, what is it, right? I don't believe in an afterlife. What could this have been? And for several months, I'm not sure exactly how long, I started playing with the idea of there being an afterlife, right? Because this was definitely not a dream. I don't really have another
Mm.
explanation for it. What could it have been? I started to wonder, basically. Um, and then at some point in the future, some months later, I ran across some information that made me think, okay, you know what? This was maybe me just getting lucky. I heard of something called a temporal lobe seizure. Um, so people who have temporal lobe seizures tend to, when they're in the midst of a seizure, they can essentially they're having a religious experience. They might think they're God, or that they talk to God, or they're invincible or something like that. So I thought, well, maybe I had maybe not a seizure necessarily, but an aneurysm, a small aneurysm, or some type of issue in my temporal lobe region, and that caused like a little flare up, and that would also explain the nosebleed. So I thought that was kind of the most plausible explanation, for many years after that.
Yeah, so the skeptical part of your brain was still very much trying to, how do I make sense of this? How do I
Right,
use science to explain what just happened?
right, exactly.
Out of curiosity, in the time frame between then and now, have you had any brain scans or anything like?
I haven't. The time it happened, I was in my early 20s. I was an invincible male, and I figured, well, I survived it. I'm fine. I don't
Hmm.
have the money to go to the doctor. This is America.
Yeah.
Um, so I never did. And at this point, you know, almost 20 years later. Well, I've made it this long. I probably don't have any
Yeah.
mental issues.
Seems to be likely, that you don't for sure based on that time frame. I was just curious
Yeah.
if you had, taken that step. Now, obviously, the way you feel about this now is not the way that you felt about it then. What was it that really started to kind of turn your,
Turn the dial.
yeah,
Yeah. That's a very interesting question, and it's going to sound completely unrelated. Um, but it's actually related to the David Grush testimony that aliens are here and have been the whole time. And it's a little hard to explain why, but essentially being a skeptic, I was also a skeptic about UFOs. And my thinking was, not that these people are all lying or not that they're all mistaken, but that some combination of the two is, most likely, right? Like some of these are probably military space planes that they're testing. Some of these are probably just people's imaginations running wild. Some of these are people's, brains misfiring, that sort of thing. I just didn't believe that UFOs were here. And since his testimony, and the testimony of, Commander Fravor and I can't remember the third guy, but they had that congressional hearing recently, and I
Mhm.
watched the whole thing. And I think that the extraordinary evidence has been met to meet the extraordinary claim when it comes to UFOs. And so, how is that related to my experience here? A little hard to explain, but I think ultimately what it is I did not give people enough credit when it comes to their experiences. I did not weigh witness testimony as heavily as I should have been. And I think that's why I missed the signal when it comes to UFOs. If I reframe that evidence and I take that more seriously, something else that people um, very often discuss is experiences just like the one I had. A lot of people have a lot of very similar experiences. It's as true to them as it was to me. Like, I can't prove it to you, and you won't understand until you have an experience of your own. But I do know this wasn't a dream,
Yep.
and it could have been my brain misfiring. But I don't know. I think I think as a whole, all of these witnesses explaining they've talked to deceased relatives or near-death experiences, I think that's a body of evidence that I wasn't taking seriously enough, and I should take more seriously now.
What do you think made you discount it before?
Probably a lot of things. One was probably my initial experience being in the Catholic Church and the guilt and the shame that we were supposed to feel. It didn't feel like a loving God to me. And then you read certain things in the Bible that are just atrocious, like things that God commanded, for instance. And then there's the fact that there's all these different religions that believe all these different things. And I would think if there was some kind of truth to an afterlife, we would have a more universal understanding. Um, I don't know. I could probably go on for a long, long time with all the different things that sort of added up to, I don't think any of this does add up.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying on that. A lot of myself growing up in, into my, my 20s and beyond. I'm 42 now. Um, very much echoed that, the majority of what what most people who are in religions consider to be their quote holy books or, you know, folklore handed down over
Yeah.
multiple generations, and someone finally halfway learned to write and they wrote down what they remembered of what their grandfather told them. And, we're supposed to build,
Right.
some kind of belief system based on that, and people do, that's the thing
Right.
people do. And, I've never been particularly interested in that. You don't seem like you are either. But you
No.
know that I'm with you on the level of seriousness on the Grush thing, but even more than him, uh, Fravor. I mean, he's never, he has not varied a single word on anything he said to many people, including the
Right.
majority of Congress. And the people who do that job, you know, I'm sure that they run the gamut of personalities, but generally they're extremely serious people, and they're generally
Yeah.
people who you know, the things that they say are happening are I think extremely likely to be accurate. And these guys are also being very honest, in my opinion, about the things that they don't know. And I think that is almost more important than the things that they say they know.
Right.
Jeff, do you think for you it was with with Grush and Fravor that their positions lended them credibility?
Yeah. So, my friends who think I'm crazy now have asked me this. Well, what makes what makes Grush more credible than all these other people who have come out in the past? And
Yeah.
well, part of it is this is the first major whistleblower that has come out since I've been an adult. There's,
Hmm.
I guess, kind of been a lull back when I was a child or beforehand. I know this was kind of a big thing. There were more whistleblowers, but at my age, I just wasn't too familiar with any of them. And I figured, well, it's been this long. How can they have kept it under wraps this long? And I
Right.
never really investigated who those people were. But, the other thing is that Grush's credibility kind of is in my opinion, in a league of its own when it comes to any of the previous whistleblowers I've heard of. He had all of this security clearance. It was his job to investigate UFOs. He did that job apparently very well. And people have come out of the closet to confess things to him as part of his investigation. And then he's not only testified under oath, but the things that he's testified to are pretty easily disproven if false. Um,
Right.
and so, I guess time will tell, but one instance is that he's said he knows exactly where these craft are and can give the locations and would do that in a secure setting. Another one is that he can explain the exact methods that the money was used to, you know, that they laundered this money in order to fund these projects, even naming some, the names of some, I don't know what you would call them, organizations or methods used to do so. And, if this isn't true, and he can name the specific companies involved in these things, if this isn't true, I work for a company and I work for the accounting team, and um, it would be astoundingly easy for us to prove and show the receipts for pretty much any transaction. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, the private companies that allegedly have been working on these crafts should be able to do the same. And if they can't, it should be very easily to put him in jail, Grush in jail for lying.
Right.
Yeah, if you lie to Congress, you pretty much go to jail forever. So
Right.
he's, there, anybody who in that position is really incentivized to tell the truth as they understand it. And, I mean, paper trails are how the majority of people who do bad things get caught doing the things they're doing.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think you make a good point there.
So yeah, I mean that's just kind of my thought process. I discounted all these whistleblowers from the past, and I should have given them more credit. And I'm just sort of applying that to not the whistleblowers, but all the people claiming to have had these otherworldly experiences.
Hmm.
There's a lot of people claiming it, and maybe as a whole, if one individual witness is not good, solid evidence, I still think the whole of us or the whole of them, maybe we should take that more seriously than I previously had.
And I mean, I think in the past they did a pretty good job of discrediting people who did come forward, like Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
I think they made him look like a crazy man, and so it's easy to not believe that.
Yeah, I hadn't even heard his name until I started sort of looking into this more on my own. So
Until you went down the rabbit hole.
yeah, like right down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We understand.
Yeah.
We're right there too.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, Bob Lazar is probably going to take you to Whitley Strieber if you're not already there yet.
Yeah. So, Brittany, you might be interested, but Whitley Strieber, the author of Communion,
Mhm.
um, there's kind of a synchronicity between him and that book and my experience in this cottage. I told you when I started my vision, I was in this certain part of the cottage. Well, that was the bookcase. And the most memorable book I ever read as a kid from that bookcase was Communion.
Oh,
And as a kid,
wow.
I just thought it was like a cool horror story. And ever since the Grush revelations have come out, I've remembered that book and have purchased it and read it again since. And, this time it's meant something very different to me.
Hmm.
And it's just interesting how those two connected in ways that could be entirely coincidental, John,
Yeah.
or maybe not, Brittany.
Yep.
Depends how you want to see it.
That's fascinating. That is a book I definitely am interested in reading. I know John has a copy. Also a little terrified of it.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I've
it's
got a first edition hardcover about 3 feet from Brittany right now, actually.
Yep.
oh nice. Yeah, it's an interesting book. It is scary. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I think part of what makes it so scary is that it's allegedly real.
Right.
Certainly, and
Yep.
also he had a history as a horror author of fiction, and so he
Yeah,
took those fiction skills and applied them to a story that's very close to him.
yeah,
I think there's some back and forth in the community about the veracity of some of the things that he has said over the years. But I think his first couple books, I think that he believes he experienced the things he said he experienced in those books.
yeah, yeah. As for whether it happened, we can never really know.
Right.
I don't think he even truly knows, as he kind of says. But I think it's just one piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of
Absolutely.
people who have claimed to have similar experiences to him, and I think it's hard to explain the entire body of those experiences. It's hard to explain that all away as mental illness or, you know, seizures or
Hmm.
aneurysms or vivid dreams.
Right. And I have had an experience similar to yours where I considered it to be a visitation from my grandmother. And I think you're absolutely right in saying that when you're experiencing it that this is not a dream. This is not a normal, I'm just, conjuring this up as I'm sleeping type of experience. But unless you've experienced it, it's hard to put that into words because it is really a feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't experienced it, but the way I can explain it is, I'm pretty much an expert sleeper. I've done it almost every day of my life. I know what that feels like, and
Right.
I know that this did not feel like that.
Yeah, yeah, it felt very different. Would you still consider yourself to be an atheist at this point?
I would definitely not consider myself affiliated with any of the world's religions.
Hmm.
Um, and so I also don't know that I necessarily believe in the idea of a God. Um, but I guess I would say I'm not sure, right? Like a lot of people define atheist as not theist. Um,
Hmm.
and I consider this actually more of a science thing than a spiritual thing. I think that perhaps there's, a field of consciousness that we're a part of, and that when we're in a body, we're cut off from that, choked off in some way. And when we die, perhaps we go back into this field. And maybe that's what heaven is, right? You're
Hmm.
just part of this connected consciousness. It's a wild, outlandish idea for which I have no evidence. But, so but it could be a field the same way gravity is a field, and it could be something that interacts with life or brain waves or something like that. And um,
Just something we can't measure yet,
something
basically.
we can't measure yet. Exactly. It might be something like quantum, for instance. Maybe we're approaching,
Right.
understanding how this field interacts with our minds. That's a possibility. So, am I an atheist? Well, I think you can be not a theist and believe in this idea and believe it's a science-based thing.
I
Um,
love how you're framing it because you're framing it in the scientific way of conceptualizing it. And people in different spiritual communities, especially like the ones that I belong to, um, would describe it very similarly.
hmm,
You know, they might use a little bit different terminology, but the essence is the same. That we're all coming from the same energy pool.
yeah, right. Yeah, like I said, I'm a career atheist and skeptic, and that's just kind of how I've taught my brain to work.
Hmm.
And that's just, I've only been flirting with this idea for a month and a half now. So this is just an idea I have that, again, I have no evidence for, but it makes sense to me. It would explain how it's possible that people are having these spiritual experiences and contacting people in an afterlife, without, believing all of these mythologies, many of which and most of which have been proven wrong in some sort of sense, right? Like we've proven that we've evolved from simpler beings. There was no Adam and Eve in a garden eating an apple, that sort
Right.
of thing.
The world's more than 6,000 years old,
Right.
for sure.
Exactly.
Dinosaurs were real. They
Yeah.
existed,
Yeah.
So it would be impossible for me to go back to that. It's just to me
Right.
been disproven. But
for sure.
that doesn't mean that there's parts of it that they might have got right. And so I don't know. It's been a fun space to explore. How can this fit in with what I do know about reality? That sort of
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah, definitely expanding your mindset and your beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're definitely going down an interesting path, in my opinion. For what it's worth, and this is some, I am skeptical, but I also have spent most of my life around this type of thing. I have some experiences myself that I don't have a real explanation for on a logical basis, and I've read more than I would say most on these types of subjects. And the people that make the most sense to me personally are basically ones who break it down as, if you take out the people who are lying or delusional, what you've got is a wide range of different experiences that may be coming from the same source. And maybe that source is that invisible, invisible to us now, energy that one day we will find a way to measure. I
Yeah.
mean, how long ago was it that we were able to measure what an atom was? In the grand scheme of things, that was like yesterday,
Yeah. Right. Exactly. On the scale of evolution, that was a blink of an eye ago.
for sure.
Waiting for science to catch up.
Hmm. Yeah. That's interesting.
What what are your thoughts about, so if aliens are real and they've been here this whole time, what are your thoughts about them, where they come from?
Oh, man. That took me to some very dark and some very friendly places, all in a span of just a couple of weeks. I've had moments where I just could not focus on work because, oh my God, are they going to come kill us all? Um, I don't know what they want. I am convinced they're here, and I'm convinced they have been the whole time. Not just my whole life, but like I think it's likely they've been here as long as humans have been here. Um, So what does that mean? I think the most likely explanation I've heard is that we are some kind of a zoo. Because isn't the weird thing that they're here and they're hiding, you know? Why are they hiding? Why wouldn't they
Hmm.
just be open about that? Um, perhaps we're some kind of experiment, and that's why they've let all the evil go on, all the wars and the genocides. They've just sort of let humans have their own free will and do what they please. Um, I find that strange, right? So there's definitely not a benevolence there, but they also haven't come to kill us and take all our resources. So there doesn't
Right.
seem to be a malevolence either. There just seems to be maybe a curiosity.
Maybe they're scientists.
Yeah, maybe.
So your belief is that they are living on this planet, they're just hiding. It's not that they're coming in and out, that type
I
of thing.
I think one thing I'm convinced of is that they're not from a different planet around a different star.
Okay.
I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they have some kind of base or multiple bases in our oceans, in the deep ocean. And I base that off of, the fact that most of the reports of sightings have been over the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
mostly by airplanes over the ocean, and of people observing them coming out of the ocean or back into it. And then I think there's also a lot of evidence to suggest that it's an interdimensional thing. We can observe three spaces of length, width, and height, and there might be more that we can't observe or interact with, but they can.
That's kind of where I land, I think, is, you know, interdimensional. Not that they're coming from another planet, but from a different dimension.
Yeah. And a lot of the testimony that, Grush had was, and also during his whistleblower interview, he mentioned that he was calling them non-human intelligence because he didn't want to denote origin, which tells me he's not exactly sure, but also that he suspects, like I do, that they're not from another planet around another star. Maybe it's here, maybe it's another dimension. And then did you hear about the spacecraft that um, people in Lieutenant Graves' unit? I don't know if he was a lieutenant, but Graves, one of the people who testified, a lot of people were explaining they observed a black cube in a clear sphere. That was the UFO that they experienced. And I don't know if you're familiar with what a tesseract is, but if you take a cube in 3 dimensions and it's hard to explain. Um,
I know about it from the Marvel movies,
yeah. Oh, okay.
right? Like that was a
Part,
thing, wasn't it, John?
Right. It is, but more well, if you ever read A Wrinkle in Time by Metal and Lingle,
when I was a
um
kid, yeah,
no, that tesseracts are actually a big part of that. It's a four-dimensional analog to what a cube is. Um
yeah,
which good on her for being able to describe something that we don't have a physics model for at this point. But basically, if you render it in our visual range, it actually looks like an optical illusion.
yeah. So right, yeah. So like a tesseract is what a 4 dimensional object that's a perfect cube in 4 dimensions might look like if it were to cross through our 3 dimensional universe. And the description of this black cube in a clear sphere um, seems to me like that 3 dimensional projection of some different shape than a 4 dimensional cube. And so gives, I think that's a hint that maybe these are extra dimensional creatures that, touch this 3 dimensional world. And that's where they're coming from.
Hmm.
It's a very abstract concept, but
I had
hopefully
not
it's not too advanced for.
considered that way. I have heard that part of the cube sphere thing actually reminded me of something from the third season of Twin Peaks, to be really honest with you. But that the Tesseract thing is not a thing I had considered. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I think they're here. I think they have been the whole time, and I'm not sure if they are living on the planet or if they're from four dimensions or maybe both.
Well, with the very, very, very small grasp of what little physics that I possess, um, extra dimensional viewing seems easier on a on a paper level than
Yeah,
interstellar travel, is you
it does.
don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to deal with things like this,
The
light,
speed limit of light. Right.
or also fuel.
Right. Yeah.
So that's certainly food for thought for me.
John, you've been a bit quiet. What do you think of my experience overall?
I have no doubt that you had the experience you say that
Sure.
you had. I have
Yeah.
no doubt that it was something other than a normal dream, if only for the fact that when we have even interviewed people who have had similar experiences and are saying a lot of the same things that you're saying. The way you feel about it, your cognitive thought was there. You knew things, and it didn't seem weird to you that you knew things. Like all of those things, to me, uh, fit a trend of accounts I've heard throughout my life.
Yeah.
So, I feel like that you fit into, a thing that is something that happens for sure. I tend to go more towards the hyperterrestrial idea, the idea that, all of the things that we can't yet explain with science probably are coming from the same source one way or another. Um, have you come across John Keel yet in
I
your
have not.
studies?
No.
He was middle of last century, was a very well traveled, well read reporter who he actually wrote a book called The Mothman Prophecies, which you maybe remember a film about
Oh, I
20
did see
years
that
ago.
film. Yeah.
It's nothing like the book. The book is nonfiction, or at least I would call the book speculative nonfiction.
Okay.
Most of his stuff I would call that, where he basically took a couple of years off from his normal reporting. He was it was a you know the on the level of being a New York Times reporter. He was very well thought of. He basically took 2 years and did weird stuff, and he tried to disprove UFOs and couldn't do it. But he kept seeing all these occurrences of like people would see Bigfoot and also a UFO and also the ghost of their Aunt Matilda. Um,
Yeah.
he also was one of the first people to talk about, what is no longer talked about, which there may be reasons for that, is, Men in Black encounters, things like that. Um, but, in the 60s to 70s, he kind of was the head guy of weirdness in reporting. And he came up with the idea that I come close to having an agreement with, of the things that people say they're experiencing are the things they're experiencing. The things they're experiencing may not be honest with the experiencer, but the experiencer is being as honest as they can be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I do think that there is some kind of connection between aliens and I don't know, I guess the afterlife. Um, it is interesting that people have also seen Bigfoot. Have been finding it, Bigfoot was to me always one of the sillier
Mhm.
beliefs that people had, right? That there was some hairy man in the woods, northern Minnesota, that a few people had seen. Um, I had never connected, but it's weird because, the fact that aliens are here now, or as I believe, well, maybe Bigfoot is just an alien and he teleported into the woods because he likes it. Maybe his planet doesn't have woods anymore, but we do. So he just wants to hang out every once in a while. It's plausible. I can't just discount it the way I used to.
Right. Yeah, it
That
So,
opens up a whole new world of questions and things
right.
to, to ponder, could this be real? But it seems like you've been really trying to like put the pieces together and make the connections. And what I'm hearing is maybe the connections are multiple dimensions or alternate dimensions
Yeah,
for all of these things. The
right.
afterlife, aliens, Bigfoot.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I think that's what I'm leaning toward, and there's something called string theory too, which I never really
Hmm.
understood, and I still kind of don't. But I guess very broadly, the idea is that even below subatomic particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons, at the very smallest level, are strings, and they vibrate at a certain frequency, and that determines what type of matter or otherwise energy everything in the universe is made of. And so it could be like strings vibrating at a certain frequency make up this plane of consciousness. Other strings at a different frequency make up the physical world. Other frequencies are lights. I don't know. I mean, it's all extremely conceptual, and I have no evidence for any of it. But you're right. I'm just trying to like put pieces of the puzzle together in a way that I think makes sense. Um, so
I mean, everything starts as a concept,
right,
we don't get anywhere without concepts.
right. All I really know is that the foundation I built my skepticism on kind of got shattered with the UFO thing. And I'm just sort of having to rebuild what does this new world and universe look like. And I don't know if I can articulate it well enough here, but there just seems to be a connection between aliens and consciousness and the afterlife that is definitely there, but I can't explain it in a logical way the way I kind of have some of these other connections that I've made. So I've sort of
Hmm.
not tried. But as I look into it, I just keep seeing the both pop up together over and over again. And I struggle to believe that that's just coincidence.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I don't know. Just trying to figure it
I
all out.
mean, it seems like, your whole world view has been flipped upside down.
Yeah.
Has that been uncomfortable at all?
At times, yeah. There were times where I could not focus on work because I had to try to solve this. I had to try to figure this out. Especially, yeah, I don't know. There's like there's all these doom sayings and all these. It's funny because you go down the rabbit hole and you're like, okay, am I too far down the rabbit hole here? And when it came to like the conspiracy theories that people have been saying that like the aliens are coming and they know the date, I'm like, okay, this is definitely something I've heard before. Mayan calendar stuff. I probably shouldn't
Right.
give that any thought and credit. But I played with that for a while and I was stressed out about that. Like, what if that is true? And I didn't find anything there when I dug into it. So yeah, it's been uncomfortable in a way. It's been exciting in another way.
Hmm.
There's a whole new world to explore and try and learn and figure out, at least for me. This isn't the same boring natural world that I thought I lived in. Um,
And that's got to be
so
a net positive, right?
I think it is, yeah, definitely now. When I was like unable to work for that week, um, not a net positive, but
Right.
I got through that, and yeah, it's been fun. Yeah,
I've had my moments like that, especially once you dig more into like modern conspiracy stuff. I stay away from because that space has kind of been infiltrated by some unfortunate actors, in my opinion.
okay,
But beyond that part of it, um, you know, as long as you've got a theory to the conspiracy, that stuff is always very interesting. Um, but a lot of them for me is like, what would be the reason for this? Because I mean, there are lots of conspiracies that are real. You know, I
yeah,
mean,
right,
if you take someone aside and talk and make a plan about someone else to exclude that person, you are part of a conspiracy. So
right.
yes, conspiracies are real.
Watergate happened, you know.
Right.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. This is a big one, though. I mean, I discounted it purely on the fact of how big it is and how long it's gone on, and I I am now convinced that that actually happened, and it's also convinced me, okay, the government is capable of some pretty extreme cover-ups and disinformation campaigns, and I have to take a look at everything else I discounted for the same reason. Doesn't mean I believe everything is possible now, but
Right.
I'm a little more careful about just throwing things out the window.
Mm-hmm. A little more open to exploring it.
Right. Yeah,
So you had
exactly.
said that people in your life were thinking you're crazy. Is there
Yeah.
anybody who's going down this rabbit hole with you, or are you kind of a man by
No,
yourself? Oh
no,
no.
I made a lot of friends with a lot of skeptics. That is what we had in common. And so, when that is your kind of your circle of friends, of your closest friends anyway. And it's interesting because I was the first atheist, and I have always been happy, like, yes, another atheist. Every time somebody got converted, I'm like, aha, all right, justification.
Uh-huh.
Um, Now I can talk to him about this. And so, yeah, now I'm hoping I'm the first to believe in UFOs here, and first of many, I'm hoping. But yeah, they're they're wondering what happened to me. So they've said, "Hey, are you okay? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you like things like that?" And there was a manic phase for like a week or two where this is all
Yeah.
I thought about from the moment I went to bed and the moment I woke up. So they were not exactly wrong, I
Yeah.
guess, in their
I
concern.
mean, overnight the whole world had changed for you.
Yeah, almost
So,
overnight. It probably took a few days to really think about it and realize, because at first it's like, okay, do I believe this guy? Okay, he seems credible. Let me dig into him a little bit. Okay, shit, yeah, this guy is credible. He's
hmm.
incredibly credible. Um, but yeah, after a few days, I was like, okay, this is real. I believe this, and this this resets all of these other beliefs, and I have to untangle this, and I have to figure out where I am now.
I think it's kind of important to note, and this is kind of a theme with me. So as episodes come through, you're going to see this is not the first time I've applied things like this. Um, but I don't think I've been, quite this out there with it. At some point, atheism became its own religion, and there are people who are militant atheists, and I think the skepticism is kind of the same way. People who are calling themselves skeptics who just decided that nothing is anything. But Alan Greenfield, which is a super interesting guy I've been reading a lot about recently and watching interviews. He's a very interesting person who has had a lot of strange experiences in his life. Said this a couple weeks ago. Skeptics are people that don't form an opinion until they have more information. People that have a pre-existing axe to grind are not skeptics; they're propagandists. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
So I would color you still as a skeptic personally based on the things you said, because everything you've said to us is, to the best of your ability, coming from a scientific slant and a slant of questioning. And I think as long as you keep that questioning going, uh, I think you're probably all right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I wonder if I was one of those uh, religiously atheist skeptic types. As I've learned, I was too quick and too easily dismissing evidence. At least that's the way I view it now. So, but the only reason that that has changed, I think you're right that this is still coming from a place of skepticism, is I think the extraordinary burden of proof was met on a particular matter, and that I've had to take this new body of evidence into consideration in other seemingly unrelated areas. And that has also kind of brought some other walls down. Yeah.
Well, definitely a journey that I wish you luck on. Hopefully being able to talk with us about this in a way that is, getting your thoughts out in the open has been helpful to you. We definitely, one of the things we want to do here is give people a platform to kind of, hash out what has happened to them and how that's affected them, because I feel like if this has happened to you and these are the questions that you've asked and you've had those existential moments, you're not the only one that's had those
Yeah.
moments. So
Right.
it's even possible that just by doing this, some other, recovering skeptic is gonna be like, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And maybe with them, it's radio signals from, Wolf 359. Who knows? But the fact that you're obviously a clear thinking, articulate person saying these things in a way that makes sense, I think is a net positive for everybody.
Well, thank you. I had a lot of fun doing this and being here. So thank you for having me on.
Oh,
Absolutely.
absolutely. We've
This has been a
enjoyed
great
speaking to you
conversation. Yeah,
Thank you.
for
for
sure.
sure.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, what questions are you now exploring? What questions do you still have about all of this?
That is an excellent question that I could elaborate on for a long time, and we don't have enough time for all that. Um, I've been trying to figure out, as I said, I don't know that I'd say I'm atheist, but I definitely do like just sort of consider myself still a man of reason. And I'm trying to reason my way through this new set of information. And one of the biggest things is, okay, I think there's very likely a connection between aliens and the afterlife, and that there probably is some kind of afterlife, probably not what I always thought it was growing up. And so, like, what exactly is that? What does it mean? Um, I think what I'm exploring now that I think you might be very interested in is I think there's a possibility that it's not just that we're a zoo to these aliens. I think their purpose is to cultivate us and our consciousness. I think they're growing our consciousness here on this planet, and that, we might not always understand what they're doing or why, but I think that could explain why they're hiding. The point is we've got to learn to figure this stuff out together all by ourselves. That's why they're hiding. Um, Again, I have no proof of this, but it seems to fit things like the fact that they are here and seem to have been here and are hiding and are definitely connected to consciousness and this afterlife if it exists. So yeah, I'm just kind of exploring that now. And so yeah, that's my latest thing.
A very interesting question slash theory that I
Yeah.
definitely want to take some time and ponder.
Yeah, and let us know when you decide to write your book.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
We'll do. We'll do. I'm sure you guys will be a much bigger podcast. I'll be on here to advertise it.
Yeah,
Deal.
absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you so much for taking
Yeah,
the time to talk to us. This was
you're very
an
welcome.
awesome conversation. I think gave me a lot to think about and hopefully our listeners as well. So we really appreciate you and appreciate you coming on.
I had a great time. I'm looking forward to hearing the final product.
All right, man. Thank you for
Awesome.
talking to us. This was very enjoyable.
Yeah, me too. All right. Thanks, guys.
Hey, you have a good night, man.
Thanks. Take
You
care.
too. Bye.
Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.